The Wyoming House of Representatives will please come to order. Welcome, members, to our 23rd day of the 66th Wyoming General Session, Monday, March 22nd. Looks like we still have a committee out, so if you'll join me in welcoming and praying with the Reverend Rick Veit from St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Reverend Veit, please pray with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I'd like to offer you a collect for those who influence public opinion. Let us pray. Almighty God, you proclaim your truth in every age by many voices. Direct in our time, we pray, those who speak where many listen, and write what many read, that they may do their part in making the heart of this people wise, its mind sound, and its will righteous, to the honor and glory of your name, and for the welfare of all people, especially those here in Wyoming. For it's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Reverend Veit. We appreciate you being here for the rest of the week. We look forward to that. We don't have a committee yet. Here they come. Here they come. So let's go ahead and call the roll, please.
Convening roll, 23rd day, March 22nd, Monday, 2021. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flittner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Henner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Swanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Sweeney. Blackburn. Provenza. Olson. Oakley. Martinez. Williams. He just came in from over there. No, he came in. Oakley. Williams. Oakley. Mr. Speaker, 60 present.
Well, we had to drag some of them in, but we got everybody here. Thank you, everybody. I know there was a committee doing good work downstairs, so we appreciate everybody coming in. Next order of business is Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of March 19th, 2021 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Haroldson and Provenza.
Thank you very much. Senate files, we're at that order of business. Senate files on first reading. The first Senate file for consideration is Senate file number 1. No, it's not. Senate file 49. That's last week's notes. Follow the script. Senate file 49.
Senate File 49, sponsored by Senator Case.
First reading of the bill.
Deferral of criminal sentence amendments.
Senate file 49 is referred to committee number 1, Judiciary. Next, Senate file 66.
Senate File 66, sponsored by Senator Cooper.
First reading of the bill.
Slayer rule applied to joint ownership.
Senate file 66 referred to committee number 1, Judiciary. Next, Senate file 71.
Senate File 71, sponsored by Senate Appropriations.
First reading of the bill.
Strategic investments and projects account repeal.
Senate file 71 is referred to committee number 2, Appropriations. Next, Senate file 67.
Senate File 67, sponsored by Senator Driscoll.
First reading of the bill.
Repeal gun-free zones and preemption amendments.
Senate file 67 is referred to committee number 4, Education. Next, Senate file 68.
Senate File 68, sponsored by Senator Ellis.
First reading of the bill.
Absenteeism in public schools.
Senate file 68 is referred to committee number 4, Education. Next resolution is Senate Resolution 4.
Senate Joint Resolution 4, sponsored by Senator Scott.
First reading of the resolution.
School capital construction constitutional amendment.
Senate Joint Resolution 4 is referred to committee number 4, Education. Next Senate file is 152.
Senate File 152, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
First reading of the bill.
Connection of utility services.
Senate file 152 is referred to committee number 7, Corporations. Next Senate file is 73.
Senate File 73, sponsored by Senator Case.
First reading of the bill.
Tolling authority for I-80.
Senate file 73 is referred to committee number 8, Transportation. Next Senate file is 136.
Senate File 136, sponsored by Senator Perkins.
First reading of the bill.
Required Public Service Commission considerations.
Senate file 136 referred to committee number 9, Minerals. Next Senate file is 34.
Senate File 34, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz.
First reading of the bill.
Born alive infants, means of care.
Senate file 34 is referred to committee number 10, Labor. Reports from standing committees, please.
Mr. Speaker, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred Senate File 30 engrossed, Pandemic Response Review Task Force, respectfully reports same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Clifford, Connolly, Flitner, Hallinan, Ottman, Romero Martinez, Stivar, Wharf, Wilson. Representative Wilson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business and Economic Development, to whom was referred Senate File 44 engrossed, Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program Funding, respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Gray, Greer, Heiner, Sherwood, Western. Representative Greer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 58 engrossed, Wyoming Investment in Nursing Funding, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Kenner, Larson Lloyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stith, Walters. Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
All right, members, good morning again. Just a couple little updates. There's still consideration for this Saturday being one of the makeup days as we go forward. Leadership and LSO will be visiting later today and we'll firm that up. But I know some of you are thinking about your plans, and this Saturday I think seems like the most obvious day to help make up some of our time. So we have adequate time on the floor with Senate files. Seems like there was something else. I don't come to it at the moment. So we're at that order of business of bills on second reading. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 92.
House Bill 92, sponsored by Management Council, an act relating to the revision of statutes.
House Bill 92, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Next, House Bill 142.
House Bill 142, sponsored by Blockchain, commercial filing system update, an act relating to corporations.
House Bill 142, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Next, House Bill is 158.
House Bill 158, sponsored by Representative Harshman, local land use planning and zoning, an act relating to land use planning.
House Bill 158, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Next, House Bill is 170.
House Bill 170, sponsored by Representative Henderson, Wyoming Economic Development Zones, an act relating to economic development.
House Bill 170, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Next, House Bill is 187.
House Bill 187, sponsored by Representative Hunt, elected official residency requirement, an act relating to elected officials.
House Bill 187, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Next, House Bill is 197.
House Bill 197, sponsored by Representative Newsom. Connect Wyoming Program Federal Funding, an act relating to the emergency expenses of government related to broadband internet access.
House Bill 197, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Next, House Bill is 205.
House Bill 205, sponsored by Representative Banks, Select Committee on Extractive Industry Transitions, an act relating to the legislature.
House Bill 205, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Next, House Bill is 249.
House Bill 249, sponsored by Representative Clifford, Railroad Safety, an act relating to railroads.
House Bill 249 does have an amendment. Chairman Greer.
Mr. Speaker, move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 249. Ask for the body's favorable consideration. Well, members, it's clear that my views on this are not going to carry the day, so I figured I'd better come in and at least clean this up and make it consistent. So with respect to this amendment, if we truly are talking about issues of safety, what I've done is deleted the term light engines. You look at the definition of a light engine, it is something without cars attached to it, although it has also been interpreted to require an engine with a caboose, so a 2-car component. So I've deleted that out to simplify the bill. Second of all is then I also included Class 2 railroads. What's the difference between a Class 1 and a Class 2 railroad? It has nothing to do with gauge. It's nothing to do with the size of the trains. It has nothing to do with the size of the engines. What it has to do with is the profitability of the company. And there is a Class 2 railroad, one that I'm aware of in Wyoming that runs from Minnesota through South Dakota and into Colony, Wyoming. And then probably the most important component of this that I really wish somebody to consider is instead of making this a misdemeanor, which has criminal connotations to it, even though there was not jail time associated with the original bill, what I did was went in and found where we deal with civil violations, still offers a mechanism for a civil violation without it being a misdemeanor. And that makes me a little more comfortable. If you're going to have, it's a violation or offense, it's it's subtle, but it's significant to me. If my company does something wrong and we have to pay a violation, I can deal with that. If my company does something wrong and I'm somehow implicated as being a criminal, I don't particularly like that. So those three components are the changes. And with that, I'll take any questions and ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Representative Clifford, first time, amendment number 1, 249.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would consider this a friendly amendment, so aye on the amendment and aye on the bill.
Further discussion on second reading amendment number 1. Further discussion, seeing none. None a second time. Members, we're voting on second reading amendment number 1, House Bill 249. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 249, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Joint Resolution 9.
House Joint Resolution 9, sponsored by Representative Sweeney, Local Government Investment and Equities, a joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution to allow local government entities to invest in stocks and equities subject to legislative authorization.
House Joint Resolution 9, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next joint resolution is House Joint Resolution 11.
House Joint Resolution 11, sponsored by Representative Summers, state sovereignty impacted by federal actions, a joint resolution requesting the federal government to respect state sovereignty.
We do have an amendment. Representative Summers. Members, and first for the majority floor leader, the mic at the podium over there is not functioning. IT staff is working on that, but for some reason it's not coming up today. So if you want to come to the front of the room, please use this one where the majority floor leader. Please proceed, majority floor leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'd like to move second reading amendment number 1 to House Joint Resolution 11 and ask for your favorable support. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is just some simple technical corrections that our good staff brought forward, mostly grammatical. So thank you.
Any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to House Joint Resolution 11, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Joint Resolution 11. House Joint Resolution 11, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. We are at that order of bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the consent list consisting of the following bills. House Bill 164, House Bill 166, House Bill 171, House Bill 190, House Bill 207, and House Bill 217.
Would any member like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Chairman Harshman.
Went dim. Okay, I'm going back. Mr. Speaker, I don't know, the chairman, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Yeah, so Mr. Speaker, the list is showing an amendment for 164.
Thank you, Mr.
Please proceed, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Speaker. 164, could we please remove it from the
Okay,
list? I
thank
have an
you.
amendment.
We had not received the amendment yet, so that's why we didn't have that notice. And 164 removed from the consent list. Any other member like a bill removed from the consent list? Any other member? Any other member? All right, will the reading clerk please read the bills on the consent list?
House Bill 166, sponsored by Representative Harshman. Utilities, presumption against early facility retirements, an act relating to public utilities being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 171, sponsored by Representative Harshman. Executive branch funding restoration, an act relating to the operation of state government being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 190, sponsored by Representative Brown. Vehicle titles for non-resident owners, an act relating to vehicle certificates of title being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 207, sponsored by Representative Haroldson, coal-fired generation facility closures, litigation funding, an act relating to the administration of government being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 217, sponsored by Representative Wilson, Community Health Center and Rural Health Clinic grants, an act relating to public health and safety being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Roll call on the consent list. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. McGuire. Excused. We have 59 and 59 aye, 1 excused. As for House Bill 166, are there any changes? Brown? Aye to no. Connolly? Aye to no. Sherwood? Aye to no. Burt? Aye to no. Provenza? Aye to no. Roscoe? Aye to no. Clifford? Aye to no. Yin? Aye to no. Schwartz? Aye to no. Banks? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote? Vote is closed. 49 aye, 10 no, 1 excused. As for House Bill 171, are there any changes? Gray? Aye to no. Heiner? Aye to no. Burt? Aye to no. Nyman? Aye to no. Haroldson, aye. To know. Blackburn, aye. To know. Andrew, aye. To know. Nicholas, aye. To know. Wharf, aye. To know. Hunt, aye. To know. Henderson, aye. To know. Larson Lloyd, aye. To know. Wharf, I have you. Thank you. Williams, aye. To know. Flitner, aye. To know. Olson, aye. To know. McGuire, excuse to, aye. Oakley, aye. To know. Ottman, aye. To know. Knapp, aye. To know. Western, aye. To know. Stith, aye. To know. Crago, aye. To know. Stivar, aye. To know. Duncan, aye. To know. Greer, aye. To know. Winter, aye. To know. Hallinan, aye. To know. Larson Dan, aye. To know. Fortner, aye. To know. Bear, aye. To know. Baker, aye. To know. Jennings, aye. To know. Washit, aye. To know. Nicholas, no to aye. Okay. Further changes. Closing vote. Henderson, no to aye. Further changes. Closing vote. The vote is closed. 30 aye, 30 no. As for House Bill 190, are there any changes? McGuire excused to aye. Larson Dan, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 58 aye, 2 no. As for House Bill 207, are there any changes? McGuire excused to aye. Roscoe, aye to no. Sherwood, aye to no. Connolly, aye to no. Clifford, aye to no. Yin, aye to no. Banks, aye to no. Schwartz, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 53 aye, 7 no. And as for House Bill 217, are there any changes? Gray, aye to no. Larson Dan, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. McGuire, excused to aye. Further changes? Oh, Ottman, aye to no. Further changes? Zawanitzer, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 53 aye, 7 no.
Members, by your vote, having received an affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 166, 190, 207, and 217 have passed the House. Having not received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the House, House Bill 171 has failed to pass the House. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, would you be available to take the chair for a bit?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, pursuant to House Rule 7-3, I would like to lay back House Bill 173 and 174 one day.
Is there any Representative Gray? Okay. Okay, without objection, House Bill 173 and 174 will be laid back for one day. I think Representative Gray, that microphone's not working.
Thank you. I recognize.
Okay, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pursuant to Rule 7-3, I ask that House Bill 198 be laid back one day.
House Bill 193. I'm sorry, say 198. Okay. Without objection, House Bill 198. Oh,
I object.
yep. Representative Nicholas.
Yeah, I would object to the laying back of 198 one day.
So what is the problem? Okay, so members, we will vote upon the objection, which means if we vote aye, the objection will be sustained. If you vote no, that means the bill will be laid back. Okay. Is that a voice vote or roll call vote? Let's go, we'll start with a voice vote. All those in favor, okay, so again, an aye vote is to sustain the objection, which means we'll hear the bill. A no vote means the bill will be laid back one day. So with respect to House Bill 198, all those in favor of the objection, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Chairs in doubt. All those in favor, please rise. Please hold still. All of those opposed, please rise. Okay, members, House Bill 198 will be laid back one day. Okay, we're at that order of business. The bill's on third reading and final passage. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 125. Reading clerk.
House Bill 125, sponsored by Representative Newsom, simulcasting, an act relating to pari-mutuel wagering, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Members, there are amendments. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 125. So members, on committee of the whole, we had a discussion about the distance, whether it's 100 miles, and then the context became, well, that may include multiple counties. So how do we accommodate for the vote that many counties took? The citizens took a vote and approved pari-mutuel, which then pari-mutuel operator can subsequently have simulcasting or off-track betting. So how do we accommodate the 100 miles, but still give those local jurisdictions, the counties and subsequently county commissioners a say in whether simulcasting would be allowed to continue within their particular jurisdiction? So what this does is try to actually clarify the current statute. And I believe some of what we're having a challenge with is interpretation of current statute and different people reading it differently. So with this amendment, you'll see it ties it to the live horse track, line 22. It talks the next on 23 and 24, it talks about permittees, i.e. they are parimutuel permittees, but they are not conducting races in that county. They are not conducting races. They're conducting them elsewhere in the state. So within that calendar year, we also have to have a time frame in here. Elsewhere in the statute, it talks about 3-year permits, but we don't want to ban somebody for 3 years. I think that's inappropriate. So 1 year, 1 calendar year at a time. Why is that appropriate? Because if you go to that commission that takes care of this currently in the state, they have all the races planned for this year. They were planned prior to the beginning of this year. So we actually know when those races are being run, what the dates are, the dates for the running. Some of them are, July, August, September, June, July, August, and September, 3 different permittees. So it makes sense that folks know. And then what it does is it keeps the same language about the waiving, except it makes it a shall. Instead of giving a commission some latitude when there is someone that says, no, they can continue. I don't know that we want to give them latitude. I think that if there's a waiver, then they shall respond to it. And that makes more sense to me. Then the existing language regarding the permittee, this is the permittee that is doing the live horse racing, that is promoting the industry. They get a say. But I have a fail-safe in here, or I propose a fail-safe to the body. The fail-safe is the Board of County Commissioners. If the permittees can't come to an agreement, then the Board of County Commissioners can step in and make a determination based on the interests of their community, their citizens, which is the same citizens in the same community that voted for parimutuel at some time previous. So that's the tie for me is that we respect, and they only get to make the call for their county, not for the entire 100-mile radius, only for their county. So that's my offer to the body, that I think that removing the 100 miles doesn't make any sense. We're in a racing calendar season right now. So we'd have done this last year and had it effective for next year, that'd been one thing, or this year, or if we were doing it this year and effective for the following year, but we're in the season now. They may not be racing now, but their plans are made. So I think this is a medium step that we could take, this body could adopt to accommodate both the interests and give the county commissioners, let the county commissioners be the ones who would arbitrate, if you will, for lack of maybe a better term, make a determination on behalf of the citizens of their community. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions. Thank you.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's go back to Friday when we talked about this, and the intent of the bill I brought was to repeal this 100-mile rule. That was the intent, pretty clear about that. We just do away with it. We do away with fencing, we do away with impeding someone's ability to do business, and we still support live horse racing by taking those funds that are generated by those off-track betting sites and put them towards live horse racing. If any of you saved your little handout from the other day, the money going to live horse racing, the money going to those breeder awards has been increasing year over year. So I think that that is reasonable. As to this amendment, it seems to me to muddy the waters. It seems to me to make it less clear. And my question is, if you are the live track permittee and you have off-track betting within 100 miles, are you allowed to have your off-track betting establishments open? Or is it just the people who don't have that permit for live horse racing in that venue, say for instance, in Campbell County, but they have live horse racing in Sweetwater County? So how does that affect the off-track betting owned by the permittee in the county running the live horse races? If it's all about we can't have anybody betting on horse racing anywhere else, so then everybody's off-track betting should be closed during race days, not just the live race permittee. So number one, I'm for total repeal. That's the way the bill was written. Number two, this amendment has some real flaws in it. Thank you.
Any other members for the first time? Any members for the first time? Representative Worf.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I too rise in opposition to this amendment. This would affect my community, and we think this is just a bad amendment. We agree with the bill as written. Let's just repeal the 100-mile restriction. So I would urge a no on the amendment, an aye on the bill. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have an issue with the amendment. It's counter to the intent of the bill. So you have companies who have been here, entities who have invested millions upon millions of dollars to the state of Wyoming, to the industry. And with the stroke of a pen, this piece of legislation is allowing one company that's new to the state to literally wipe out a company who has invested millions into our state and cause them overnight to be wiped out. That's the potential. So if you're voting yes on this amendment, then you're essentially wiping out the intent of the bill. So no on the amendment, yes to the bill, or if you say yes to the amendment, then you have to vote no on the bill. So you decide, vote your conscience.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Kim. I'm for the amendment, and the reason being is that you put out the resources, the dollars, the times to have these races. I think you should be awarded for that. I think that there should be a preference, priority preference for doing that. I don't think that some lobbying group ought to be able to come in from out of state and broadcast races off of your hard work. I think there needs to be boundaries and limits, and I think that's what this bill does. Thank you.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Aye on the amendment and no on the bill. If we step back just a second to recall the history of the simulcasting, I still have a bad taste in my mouth. Originally, it was about supporting live horse racing, and then the legislature came back the next year to simulcasting machines and then tried to repeal those machines. So, I think we need to I want to express a little caution in moving forward and proceeding with giving this industry more latitude. Profit margins on these machines are not small. If it was going to supporting live horse racing, that would be one thing. But in my community, the rumor is that the live horse racing is going to be removed and canceled because of insufficient and inadequate facilities. So my suggestion would be support the live horse racing and then move on. Thank you.
Any other members for the first time? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The previous speaker covered all the points that I wanted to, so aye on the amendment and no on the bill.
Okay, any other members for the first time? Any other members for the first time, second time? Any members for the second time? Second time before the sponsor? Speaker Barlow. Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to reiterate, the intent of the bill as it was brought was to repeal this non-compete. And the historic horse racing, the off-track betting supports live horse racing to the tune of about $3 million a year, going directly back to horsemen to sustain their breeding programs. So I would urge a no on the amendment and an aye on the bill. Thank you.
Okay, any other members for the second time? Second time before the sponsor. Now, Speaker Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. So members, I think that if you have an investment in the state of Wyoming, your investment is meaningful and it should be valued in the state of Wyoming. I don't think this amendment goes counter to that. I think this amendment allows the county commission, if that's the way it has to go, to say, you know what, we value both of the parties or three of the parties in our state, and we want to protect that. And we're going to figure out a way to do that. So I think that we would like the free enterprise to take care of all their issues. Well, sometimes it doesn't work. I think we've weighed into county commission rules and we've weighed into other things when private entities can't sort it out. The other thing, if you want to talk about muddy waters, take a look at the bill. Take a look at the repeal. I understand what the original intent of repeal is, but look at the effective date. The effective date is July 1st, in the middle of the racing season. So now what do we have? We have current law for half of the racing season and the repealed law for the second half. Muddy waters? I would respectfully suggest that's muddy waters. Let them sort it out. I almost brought this amendment to be effective immediately, but I wanted to be able to make the point that the proponents, if they really believe this is important, then you would have thought it would have been on one side or the other of the racing season, but it's in the middle. So that leaves still a controversy, doesn't it? The way the bill is currently drafted. So I'd ask for your aye vote on the amendment, and without the amendment, your no vote on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Okay, members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 125. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Jeez, chair's in doubt yet again. All in favor, stand. Wendy, I'm an aye on this. Okay. All those opposed? Less than 34, the amendment is adopted. We are back on the bill. House Bill 125 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll. Mr. Speaker?
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer.
Aye.
Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. No. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker.
Aye.
Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Connolly, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 23 aye, 37 no.
House Bill 125, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 125 has failed the House, failed to pass the House. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 165.
House Bill 165, sponsored by Representative Harshman. Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Program, an act relating to higher education, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
So members, just so you know that 164 was also pulled off the consent list, but it always goes at the end of the regular order. So it'll be at the end. They're not going to go, that one's not going to be in consent. So we do have an amendment, 165. Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House amendment number third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 165 and ask for your favorable consideration. And I do apologize. I tried to get it in for second reading, but last week was kind of a difficult week, so it didn't happen. This amendment does 2 separate things. The first is, and we discussed this in committee of whole, on page 7, line 4, we had some discussion about whether we should insert on line 4 that the student has not earned a baccalaureate degree, as to whether the person who had an associate's could still use this for baccalaureate. So the first line of the amendment puts that in there. And an example why I think that this is a good idea. Let's suppose I went to my local community college and got an associate's degree in applied science, which would be like welding and HVAC, that kind of thing. And in the course of doing that, I found that I really enjoyed the underlying science, and now I'm thinking, maybe I really would like to go on to university and get an engineering type degree. I think that's a great development of the person's training and something that we ought to encourage. And so that's why I put that in there. The remainder of the amendment really does one thing, even though it's kind of scattered about in a couple of places for conforming nature. And what that does, and I'll just look at the first part. So you can see on page 10, line 5 or line 4, we said that a person who had been convicted of a felony was not eligible for the program. And my thinking is, and what the amendment does, is the amendment says that if a person has had their rights restored, so that would be under the various line 5, line 6, and so on, is a person who's had their rights restored from the governor, their rights to vote restored by Department of Corrections when they issue the certificate that we passed a couple of years ago, or after expungement. And my feeling is, again, that these are people who, if they have moved forward after their conviction and have cleared everything up as we have asked them to do in other statute, and they are looking at improving their skills, making a contribution to their community, supporting their family, that these people also ought to be covered under this program. And so that is the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. Any other member for their first time? Chairman Harshman. I don't think you have friendly or not, you don't have any volume. Try the other mic at the other one, please. Further discussion. So the members in the audience and the members that are listening in the World Wide Web are having a little bit of technical difficulty with some microphones. So any other discussion? Members, we're voting on third reading, amendment number 1, House Bill 165. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 165, having read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Swanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 44 aye, 16 no.
House Bill 165, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 165 has passed the House. Then you'll note, members, are for the public as well, that House Bill 173, 174, and 198 were all laid back one day. Is that accurate? Next bill for consideration is 236.
House Bill 236, sponsored by Representative Washit. Firearms transactions, financial discrimination, an act relating to banks being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 236, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Connolly, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 49 aye, 11 no.
House Bill 236, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 236 has passed the House. We have one more bill that was taken off consent list, 164. House Bill 164, reading clerk.
House Bill 164, sponsored by Representative Schwartz. Grand Teton National Park, transfer of state lands, an act relating to state lands, be enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have an amendment. Apparently, it's Chairman Harshman. We are waiting for the electrons.
Okay.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Mr. Speaker, I would move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 164. Members, this just, there's really 6 full sections right around community Jackson inside the national park. Then there's some quarter sections right next to some multi-million-dollar resorts. There's one up on a hillside. But these 6, one of them is pure gold. The others may be platinum. I don't know what the next one is. I mean, it's, and I just printed off a couple sales. These are less than 2-acre lots. Bare ground, old pasture land down by the sewer plant. 1.7 acres for $9 million. And then 1.85 acres for 9.2. Now, I'll just, a little history, back several governors ago, Early nineties, we sold the Boyles Hill section, state school section for 5 million. The investor turned it into $500 million within a couple of years. Made a national magazine as one of the greatest investments of all time. We sold that priceless land for 5 million. We sold a conservation easement right on the river for $1.5 million. I'm all for conserving it. I don't think any, I mean, we gave away a few acres a few years ago for 40 million. And there's this talk now that we can get rid of one of these acres for 70 million. It's worth billions. It's not worth 70 million. And so when you can sell these 2-acre lots, it's going for 5 million an acre, folks. And this is the best land there. It's priceless. And we'd be better off to just keep a few grazing fees on it until someday. We just passed a stimulus bill with 1,900 billions. And I think we want to wait and get the fair price on this. So we send this bill out today with this 500,000 an acre deal. We're going to all say, geez, I wish we wouldn't have done that. And I think back to when I was in high school, you know, late 70s, early 80s. Nobody could ever dream this land would be that much. So think about when your kids or great grandkids are going to school in this state. And we, you know, we have this constitutional duty to make sure these lands work to the highest value. And we sold Boyles Hill for 5 million. And then we'll look back and say, oh, we sold this baby for 40, 50 million. So it kicks off a couple million a year in investment return. Folks, we're looking for new coal mines. We know it. I mean, we can talk all this talk. The bottom line is we've lost all these 250 million tons of coal that's provided for the state. And these are some of the answer, I think, down the road. But to put a bare minimum price in there, 500,000 an acre is a giveaway. And so I'd hope you'd support the amendment. If we can't support this amendment, then I'd urge us to vote no on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member? Any other member? Representative Schwartz, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment and very much in favor of the bill. Understanding real estate values anywhere is a complicated process, and you can't necessarily look at one offer and make a determination of how that would correspond to other values in this case in a county. I know my county pretty well, and I am aware that there are some parcels of land that have much higher value than others, partly because primarily of their proximity to either a ski resort or a golf course or the amenities associated with those things. The property we're looking at in Kelly has none of those things. What it has proximity to is a national park and the national forest. It's very different in concept. Currently, the way the bill is structured, we have a $500,000 minimum price per acre, which corresponds to $320 million for the parcel. We don't know what it will appraise at yet. I am fairly confident the current appraisal will be less with that, and that's fine. As I said when I introduced the bill, feels like a month ago, but I think it was last week, that's fine because this is a negotiation and we have established what I consider to be maybe slightly unreasonable, but a legitimate price with which to start a negotiation. And I think the most important thing we need to remember is that no real estate deal just happens. We have to have a negotiation, and without passing this bill, we cannot begin the conversation to have a negotiation. If you do the calculation at 5 million an acre, we are saying that the price we want for this school section is $3.2 billion. And as crazy as land prices are in my county, that's not a reasonable price. That is merely a statement of, I hate to say it, that the state of Wyoming is putting an unreasonable value on a property and we are not interested in even having a conversation. I think we want to have this conversation with the federal government because ultimately I think we can have a final agreement that is good for the state, good for the national park, good for the people of Wyoming, and good for the citizens of the planet by preserving this park. Because as a man once said on a series on TV, America's national parks are America's best idea. I am strongly against the amendment and truly hope you will consider.
Thank you. Representative, any other member for their first time? Any member for their first time? Representative Flitner for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. On and for the amendment, and I'm not quite sure on the bill. And I appreciate the good bringer of the bill's intent. But you know the old adage, they aren't growing any more land. And they're certainly not growing any more land around Teton County. My folks bought a couple of lots in Buffalo in the 70s. They paid $500 a piece for them. Within a couple of years, they turned them over at they made $1,000 a piece for them. They thought they had cut a fat hog. Within a couple of decades, those same lots were in the thousands. And I know it's just relevant. This land is extremely valuable. And I think what the former speaker said is a very good point. I know that the point is to try to enter into discussions, but I think we should not sell this land short. These developers know what they're buying the land for. They're going to do well. Let's protect our investment.
Thank you. Chairman Nicholas, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment, ladies and gentlemen, what this amendment does is it kills the bill. And it kills the possibility of having any transaction with our good folks because they're not going to pay billions and billions of dollars for 640 acres and only about 2/3 of it are developable. There's a prescriptive easement that goes across it that the state entered into. The good prior senator and governor of the state of Wyoming signed that easement. But basically this is called the Kelly Parcel. It's out there. So it's, before you get to the airport, and it's out on that sagebrush flats that's out there that has a panoramic view of the Grand. So there's two issues here. Does it make sense to sell it? Because it's just absolutely beautiful. And in that sense, it's priceless. But what we did, we said, well, what's a reasonable but a very high price for this property? And that's how we came up with the 500,000, and that results in about $320 million for a lot that is not as exquisite as the one we sold 10 years ago for 70 million. Imagine if we had 320 million and we could direct all of those funds into the Common Schools Permanent Land Fund. That would raise the equivalent to $60 to $100 million a year, literally, and take care of half of our school budget deficit. We could take care of it. By putting it at 5 million an acre, there will never be a sale. And basically it kills the possibility of a sale. And so the question is, do we want to be realistic about it or do we just not want to sell it? So that's the question. So then what happens if even at the 500,000, let's assume that the bill has to pass for to even get the appraisal to have it open up the discussion. But there will be no discussion if it's 5 million an acre. And obviously, with the larger the tract you sell, the less value it is per acre. And so if you have an acreage that sells for 5 million or 10 million within a country club or within someplace that's already developed, everything, all the amenities are already there, and you happen to be right next to the tram, there may be some logic to that amount. But for 640 acres, it's not even, literally, it's off the charts as unreasonable. So we thought that 500,000 acres per acre for the whole thing could go a major way to help support our schools. And it was worthwhile for us to do it. It, in essence, would turn into a coal mine or a gold mine or an oil well with that much money if we received it. And we should receive that value and roughly, something that brings that much to us. And so we thought the number was more than reasonable, but 5 million, it just basically kills the bill. So on and against.
We're on first time, Vice Chair Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on and for the amendment. I'm not really in favor of selling the parcel, but if you're going to consider selling the parcel, the thing that I don't like about the bill is we only offer it to the federal government. And so how do you get the true value if you restrict who it is you offer the parcel to? And so if we were going to sell the parcel, I would say that you open it up. Now, I understand the argument. Well, would you want anybody to develop there? Would you want anybody to build homes there? I think those are fair arguments, but how do you really establish what the value of that property is, and then maybe give the government first right of refusal if the value is there? But I think that you're really restricting what the offers are going to be if you just offer it to the federal government. So not really in favor of selling the parcel, but if you're going to do it, you ought to get everything you can for it. So for the amendment, against the bill, frankly.
Chairman Eklund, first time.
So I this is a tough one because there've been some good arguments.
Go ahead and
both
address the
ways.
chair too, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. My apologies. Mr. Speaker, this is kind of a tough issue, I think, because we tried it a few years ago and the federal government just kind of backed out and we didn't have the negotiation we expected. I'm in favor of the amendment. It can go on to the Senate and change a little bit, maybe wouldn't be quite as high and would be more reasonable. If we do this, it'll fund schools for just one time. It'll be $320 million. And so I think I would just soon we hang on to it. I like what the former speaker said about opening it up to the free market system. I know that it's in a national forest. If it remains a state land, it'll remain part of the national forest system and people can use it for a while. There isn't any reason to get into a hurry to sell it.
Representative Yin for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I think the previous two speakers talked about opening it up to the free market. I want to just give some context that we passed a bill last year to try to come up with development proposals for that parcel, and nothing was near close to the amount of money that we could get on dividends and interest of investing the money that we could make from the sale. So to the idea that it makes sense to kill this bill and then sell it, maybe list it in the free market or whatever, it's not going to happen. No one's going to want to say they can put it in a place where they essentially can't connect to anything because it's in the middle of the national park, and the national park's not going to agree to connecting it to anything, that we're going to make a bunch more money on the free market. I think essentially the question is $5 million an acre reasonable? We just had a sale in the state of Wyoming that was worth 1.3 billion. Was that 640 acres? No, it was 1 million surface acres and 4.5 million mineral acres. Is the Kelly Parcel in Grand Teton National Park worth 3 times as much as southeast Wyoming? The amendment I'll ask you to vote no on the amendment and aye on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Other members for their first time, Representative Gray, and then to Duncan. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really urge an aye vote on the amendment and a no on the bill, even with the amendment. This is only going to go up. It's only going to go up in value. And this mentality that we heard a couple speakers ago, downplaying the value of the property, this can't mentality, downplaying this value. That's why we got into the situation that the former speaker, the chairman of revenue, talked about with another priceless parcel. So let's vote aye on this amendment, and I'd also urge a no on the bill. Thank you.
Representative Duncan for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to say yes or no on the amendment or the bill. But I will remind you, you only receive any revenue when you have a buyer and a seller who agree on a contract and you come through on the contract. So when you have a $5 million on a particular parcel and it sells, then you generate revenue. But if you don't sell it, you don't generate anything. So make your decision. But I just, you can't generate revenue on something when it's not sold, when you have a proposed idea potential, so think of it that way.
Thank you. Any other members for their first time? We are on first time. House Bill 164, first time. Seeing none, second time before the sponsor, second time Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So there's this notion that the value of property in Teton County is infinite. And I would fundamentally disagree with that. We have many parcels that we will be considering. House Bill 162, this is not the only school section, and there are many other parcels that are not full sections that we can sell there that actually have value in terms of development. I would argue there is one that is relatively close to the hill that I ski down that I could say the value might be in the billions. I don't know. It is something that would be appropriate to develop. The parcel we're talking about is significantly different. So I'm going to say it again. It's surrounded on three sides by a national park, on the other side by a national forest. It has huge value for the tourism industry in Teton County. And I'll remind you of a couple of things I said. Every year, the state of Wyoming gets something like $60 million in sales tax revenue based on that tourism. We're getting $90 million a year in property tax revenue, and $15 million of that is recapture. All of this is based on what Teton County has done to create the tourism industry related to Grand Teton National Park. We need to be able to have a conversation with the federal government on this parcel. And maybe there will be no agreement, but without this bill, there can be no conversation. I think the $500,000 an acre is a reasonable starting point to have a conversation. If we say $5 million an acre, we are basically saying we are not willing to be reasonable in a conversation. And we're never going to get to a point where maybe we'll get a good value for a parcel that really should be part of the park to help maintain the strong tourism industry in Teton County. I was involved in that industry for 30-something years. I have a real good understanding of why people come there and why they spend money there and what they take away in their brains and their hearts when they leave. And that parcel is one that should belong in the park, and that's how those tourists would feel about it if they could come to the podium here today. They're not allowed to. I will speak for them on and against the amendment and strongly in favor of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their second time before the sponsor, Representative Gray? This mic over here, Representative Gray. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say really quick, it's a big decision for the body. And every time this bill is brought, it's been brought 2 or 3 times I've been here. This should be a committee bill that is studied. We should have 100 to 150 page dossier before us in evaluating the value of these. And every time it's an individual bill with just back and forth on what the value is, this is how the state gets to a bad decision. Please vote aye on the amendment and no on the bill. Thank you.
Any other member for their first time, second time, excuse me. Second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor of the amendment, Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for all the discussion. Folks, I think, you sell this for that 320 million. It's not 60 million a year in revenue. right? It's 16 million a year. Because you sell it, it goes into the common school count, right? It's not, I think someone was said 60 million or 70, it's not that. And I'll just say, there is an easement through this one parcel, but I think that's questionable as well. There's always more to these stories. And we don't want to give this away. And I guess I would tell you, this legislature created the state land board. They're a creation of ours, right? It's not in the Constitution. And those are the top 5 officials. They can enter into these. And so I would encourage you, every time you see one of those 5, say, hey, it's pure gold. Let's go to work on it. We'd love to sell it to the federal government. But our coal revenues have been taken away. And we gotta replace it. And this is one way, and not by doing 500,000 an acre. It's a giveaway. And so really appreciate the discussion, appreciate the bringer of the bill. And please vote aye on the amendment. Thank you.
Members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 164. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. Division being called. All those in favor, please rise. Those opposed? 34, not more than 34. So the amendment is adopted. House Bill 164, having been read thus 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass the House? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Harshman, no to aye. Washit, aye to no. Burkhart, aye to no. Newsom, no to aye. Duncan, no to aye. Crago, aye to no. Clausen, no to aye. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 24 aye, 36 no.
House Bill 164, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 164 has failed to pass the House. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You've heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion. All those in favor, please say aye. That was remarkably unenthusiastic for the last day of committee of the whole. All those opposed say no. We are in committee of the whole. Chairman Duncan.
The committee of the whole will come to order. What's our first? I don't even have the list. Do I? The first bill for our Oh, Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And so ladies and gentlemen, we're in committee, the last day of committee of the whole in the body of origin. We'll run no later than 7 o'clock tonight, and I've reordered the first 7 bills, and then I'll probably give you a new list. And it's pretty much the same bills that were listed. It's just in a little bit different order. So the order we'll have now, we'll start out with House Bill 146, which is the same bill. And then we'll move to House Bill 210, and then House Bill 247, and then House Bill 127, House Bill 36, House Bill 253, and House Bill 161. And then after those 7, I'll probably give you another 7. Just to repeat that, 146, 210, 247, 127, 36, 253, and 161.
Yeah. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 146. Reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 146, sponsored by Representative Fortner, personal property depreciation, an act relating to property taxation. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 3, Revenue, to whom was referred House Bill 146, personal property depreciation, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Baker, Gray, Hallinan, Harshman, Jennings, Sweeney. Noes, Representatives Henderson, Roscoe, Yin. Representative Harshman, Chairman.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move that when committee of the whole rise and report to do so with a recommendation that House Bill 146 do pass and turn it over to the sponsor, the good representative from Campbell County.
Mr. Chairman. I'd like to
Representative Fortner.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to present my bill. We went through catastrophic times in the whole state last year between fossil fuels and the COVID. And so I had to try to rethink some kind of strategy for these guys to stay in business, and this is the best that me and LSO could do. It's an act relating to private property taxation specifying that the value of the tangible personal property shall consider depreciation and shall not be increased above the market value of the property, providing for an effective date. Basically, what it does is it's calling for fair market value on personal property taxes. And that would affect almost every business, well, every business in Wyoming, whether it's big or small. It affects all the employees of those businesses because it gives them extra capital to continue operating in catastrophic times. And then to move on from there, I got some bullet points in the back that I wanted to bring up. This tax eases tax burdens in downturns and helps them maintain jobs and that pays taxes. It prevents hardworking men and women from losing everything in the event of another catastrophic decline. We've seen numerous businesses go out of business this year, big and small. A lot of people become unemployed. And most of all, this tax would it's going to cost the state about $18 million. But the flip side of that is every dollar that's saved is going to get spent back out in the economy and create more tax dollars. So I think it's a plus. I don't see where it's going to be a big draw. To me, it's a diversification tool. And to me, it's probably one of the most important things we can do for business, big and small. And I've never begged for anything in my life, but I'm begging for you guys to pass this bill so we can give these guys some relief. Thank you.
Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Chairman, thank you. So I have some concerns on this bill that maybe can be answered. One, I don't necessarily believe the fiscal note, and I'm kind of curious how that was developed, but well, no, the fiscal's a big deal in my county, at least. I don't know what this would cost our county. And then really, how would it be administered? How are you going to figure out these depreciation schedules for all these different pieces of equipment that get replaced one piece at a time at times? So really, how are we going to get this implemented? And what's the true cost of this to counties? Those are my concerns and my questions. Thank you.
Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I also have concerns with this bill and need some questions addressed that I have on it. When you look at the section in statute, it differentiates between real property and tangible personal property. So I would like the bringer of the amendment to discuss what in his mind tangible personal property is. And then the amendment itself I have issues with. If you strip out all the language regarding what he's trying to do here, the statement seems to read that the fair value shall not include factors to increase the value above the amount that a well-informed buyer would be justified in paying for the property, and a well-informed seller would be justified in accepting in open market, which is exactly the same thing that is stated in lines 1 through 7. So I'm not convinced that the amendment actually does anything. Further, when you start defining what depreciation over time is, then you get into various definitions of what depreciation over time is. In the tax world, that's determined by statute, and it can be a short or a long period or no time at all, down to 0. For generally accepted accounting purposes, an effort is made to determine the fair value life of a property, and it does include a residual value, and this amendment says you won't include a residual value, and residual values are then subject to lower cost or market in definitions of what the value of property is on a depreciation basis. So to me, this bill is confusing a lot of ideas about fair market value with depreciated value ideas that are not clearly defined. So on and against, thank you.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm on for the bill. I just want to ask the body, are we really serious about trying to create opportunities for diversification? As the bringer of the bill said, this is an opportunity for diversification. Lower taxes is one of the things that makes Wyoming great. And this is an opportunity for us as a body to make lower taxes. I just want to illustrate just an example. Think of a mechanic who owns all of his own tools, and he has to pay personal property tax on those tools. The thing is, the way the system works right now, he's going to pay for those tools over and over and over via these personal property taxes. And I just don't think that's fair to that person. I think this depreciation idea is important. And there was a question brought earlier about how can this be calculated? And I would say that it works the same as it does on your home property taxes, real property taxes. The assessor determines the value based on what they've been taxing it in the past. And if the owner does not agree with that, they can bring an argument against that. And there, it's up to them to prove to the assessor that the value is something different than what the assessor thinks it is. And so with that, I'm on and for.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I think we've got an interesting situation here. I agree that, man, cutting taxes is a good idea, but I struggle with the fact that we're already sitting in a deficit with our school foundation account. And we want to make that even bigger now. I heard the argument for this is that the money that's going to get saved here is going to go back into the economy and stimulate the economy. But I'm not sure that that stimulation is going to come from the oil and gas rigs that are out there that replace a couple pieces and parts here every now and then. They're not going to be writing checks to the schools. They're not going to be funding our schools. And so I worry about that. I mean, I know, at least in my constituency, and granted, I get it. My constituency is different from everybody else's in here, but I was sent here to try to solve the problem of, especially our school funding, but even our general fund deficit that we've been running. What are we going to do about it? And this bill compounds the issue. We're actually taking money back out of the availability to provide services. I don't know that I can in good conscience do that. I don't know that I can go back to my constituents and say, yeah, I'm willing to do a tax cut to businesses out there that have been doing all right. They're doing fine. We hit that barrier a couple years or about a year ago when oil was down at $20 below zero, but it bounced back. It's trading pretty good today. I think they're going to be all right. Is the juice worth the squeeze? On and against.
Is there any other discussion on the bill? Representative Krigo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On and against the bill. And I appreciate the purpose of the bill and what we're trying to accomplish. And I would note, to start with, there's already a mechanism in our statutes and in our rules and regulations regarding taxation of industries to help people. And we can do that through an obsolescence deduction when we get there. The assessors already have that tool in their toolbox, and they don't necessarily need another one to cover that problem. I also wanted to talk about what I believe are some of the far-reaching ramifications of this bill, especially as it applies to our extractive industries. As of today, based on guidance from our department that deals with all of our taxes, all county assessors depreciate operating personal property down to a minimum, or I should say a maximum deduction of 20%. So they can depreciate operating property all the way down to 20% of its original value. This is called the residual value. If you want to look it up, you can study it. It's in guidance, rules, regs of the department that handles all of our taxes. And the reason they have that floor is because property, if it's operating, actually has value. If it's producing, let's say, oil or gas from the ground, and it's doing its intended purpose, it has a value, and that value should not be zero. And what this bill does is it would allow the assessors, actually require the assessors to put that value at zero, even if the property is doing its intended job. And I think that sends us down a wrong path. And I have a couple, for example, let me give you one example. If an oil and gas company bought a piece of oil and gas equipment in 1990, and over time, that piece of equipment gets repaired. It gets new parts, it gets new pieces, but it keeps working and it keeps doing its job. This concept that the assessors use is called value in use, and that's what helps us set this residual value. Even though that piece of equipment is 30 years old, it is still doing its job, well past its useful life as set forth in guidance according to the depreciation schedule set forth in department guidance. And that's why they've set this 20% floor. The department that handles our taxes has set that 20% floor so that it can't go down to zero as long as it's still doing its job. This bill takes that away. And I'm afraid where that takes us, and it has much bigger ramifications than just oil and gas or the extractive industry. But that's where we're going to see the biggest hit in taxes. And that brings me to my final point, which is I believe the fiscal note is probably suspect. In fact, I would submit to the body and to the chairman that the ramifications for the sponsor's home county would be greater than the $8 million fiscal note alone, just in that county, based on what I know about how the system works, how these pieces of equipment actually get assessed, and how most of those pieces of equipment sitting in the field are past their original useful life today, because they just repair them, they keep working on them, and they don't go out with new pieces of equipment. On and against the bill for those reasons. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As I've listened to the discussion and stuff like that, I guess one thing that piqued my thought was that I really appreciate that the good bringer brought this, because I think that's what we're here to do. If you want to stimulate an economy, let people keep more of their money to spend as they wish. When the private sector has the opportunity to keep a few more dollars in their pocket, it's not like as if it's just going to sit in there and going to stagnate. We're talking about giving people that have been taxed and retaxed and paid for and overpaid for this particular piece of equipment money that they can go spend elsewhere. And as conservatives, I think that's our job here, is to come and to look for ways to try to develop our ability to be able to find ways that we can reinvest that money in the private sector. And if you can leave a few more dollars in my hands, I'm not going to hold on to it. I'm going to spend it in town. I may go buy more tools. I may do other things. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to keep this money working and keep it turning. And the private sector does that. So as we give these folks this opportunity to release the tax burden, we develop industry, we develop business, we develop spending. Government doesn't, I know it's probably going to draw a breath. Government doesn't create jobs. Government redistributes wealth. That's what it does. Private industry creates wealth, builds jobs. And the more of those dollars that we keep in people's hands, the more we're going to do good for this state, because they're going to reinvest those dollars. They're going to spend them, and they need them to spend. And I think the private sector does a better job of spending that money than the government does. On and for the bill.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A question really, and in my business, I've done my own taxes for like the last 12 years. And this year I threw in the towel and have turned in all the paperwork to an accountant. So I'm less fresh on it than I might have been. But it seems to me that if my property tax were to go down, then I have less property tax to deduct off my federal income taxes. And I'm wondering if it might be a wash, but perhaps some accounting person could remind me of that.
Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On and against the bill. So in my part of the world, this is a major number. And then the tax relief actually goes to companies in Oklahoma or Texas or places. And I don't think it does a very good job of stimulating the Wyoming economy. Thank you. On and against.
Vice Chair Newsom.
Thank
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think we need to also consider where those taxes go. Those taxes go to your fire department. Do you want your fire department to take a cut? Do you want your hospital district to take a cut? Do you want your nature, we have natural resources that are part of our property tax. I don't want those people to take a cut. So if you think about where this tax goes, it doesn't just go to schools. It doesn't certainly come to us. It goes to support your fire department. It goes to support your hospitals. So consider that when you're thinking about this tax cut. Thank you.
Yes. Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. You know, I think this is a good idea, but it has to be part of a bigger idea. And, you know, there's states that don't tax personal property. And if we want it, but they have other legs on the stool, like a corporate income tax, make it sure everybody's oars are in the water. And I think, you know, I think your revenue committee passed this bill because it's a good idea. But it has to be part of a larger solution. I mean, we've already got 5 pages of services and exemptions that we don't tax. I mean, we're going to be like South Dakota, right? They tax 152 services, we tax 66, and they're a sales tax only state. And if we want to, you know, we don't have many stools that we tax. If we're all for getting rid of this one, though, I think it should be more of a study and a longer term. And that's why I appreciate him bringing this, so we can all kind of talk about and learn about it. But maybe it's a interim study type thing where we look at, you know, maybe a corporate income tax, because we know it wouldn't affect our energy companies. They already got their oars in the water. They're already rowing. But, you know, remember the corporate income tax, retail fairness we had a couple of years ago passed this house. There's others don't have their oars quite wet. Pay a little bit of property tax on their building. And so this is a bigger issue in Wyoming, and we're not the only state. It's part of this kind of as you move forward, as our economies move from goods to services. And so we'll continue to talk about it. So I'm going to vote no today because I think it's got to be part of a bigger solution. This will kind of create part of the problem. We got to broaden this stuff out. But I appreciate the good representative bringing the bill. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Chairman Eklund.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, yeah, what the last speaker said does make a lot of sense. I was going to ask if there's any way of amending this to be able to fix what the sponsor's trying to fix, because they've got some big problems in their neck of the woods. And if there's some way that that could come, I'd be in favor of it. I'll probably vote aye on it, see if we can move it along and fix it in any way. As far as conservatism goes, I think Wyoming is a conservative state. Lowest property taxes of anybody. It's one of the few ways also that we even tax. So I think to get much more conservative than that, as we're losing other forms of revenue and taxes, is not the direction we want to go, but we do want to keep businesses in Wyoming and operating. So I guess I might be I vote, and we'll see if there's a way of amending it. Otherwise, an interim study might be the option that you'd have.
Representative Fortner, you want to bring us home?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my final last words is we can tax people right out of business and end up with nothing next year, or we can cut their taxes and prolong that for 5, 10, maybe the economy will come back, maybe it won't. That's a gamble. But one thing's for sure, if you tax them out of business, they're gone. They leave Wyoming. That's revenue that's missing at every level. It's from the employer, from the employee, from the state of Wyoming. I see this as a win-win. I don't see it as any kind of a leech on the system. We're an economic recession, could be going into depression. I mean, we're at that threshold right now. A lot of people already are in the depression if they're without work. Their definition is different than mine and yours. So I stick to my guns on this. This is for the working man, the working women, all large and small business. They're desperate. They need your help. and it starts right here. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Sensing you're ready for the question. Question being called. All those in favor of Chairman Harshman's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that bill number 146 do pass. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. House Bill 146 having failed pursuant House Rules 6-6B. The bill having failed a voice vote, a standing division vote is required. All those in favor, please stand. Those opposed, please stand. Having failed a standing division vote, a roll call vote is required. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Hunt, no to aye. Martinez, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 24 aye, 36 no.
Pursuant to House Rule 6-6B, House Bill 146, having failed a roll call vote, is indefinitely postponed. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 210. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 210, sponsored by Representative Bear, Minors Sex Traffic Victims Liability, an act relating to human trafficking. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 1 Judiciary, to whom was referred House Bill 210, Minor Sex Traffic Victims Liability, respectful report same back to the House with a recommendation to do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Crago, Larson Dan, Olson, Rodriguez Williams, Zwanitzer. Noes, Representatives Oakley, Provenza, Washit, Yen. Representative Olson, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Olson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 210 do pass. And I further move the adoption of the Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 210. And we'll take up the Standing Committee Amendment first. The Standing Committee Amendment is just it's really just some cleanup language. And I think once you move through the standing committee amendment, I'll turn over the explanation of the bill to the sponsor. I'll take any questions on the standing committee amendment.
Any questions? Question being called. All those in favor of the standing committee amendment? Say aye. Opposed, no. Motion is carried. Back on the bill. Representative Bear. Oh, we have a second one? We have another, you want to discuss the bill first? Representative Bear.
Madam Chairman, I'll bring the committee of the whole amendment as I'm given the description of the bill, and then I'll move that amendment at that time.
Please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I bring to you House Bill 210 and ask for your favorable consideration. Human and sex trafficking. The question for the body today is, do we as a state want to encourage victims to come forward and report what it is that they've endured, or do we want to stifle that reporting? Currently, there are no cases in the state of Wyoming, and yet the states around us have a great number of cases of this particular issue, some with minors, but most without. But my question is, with the I-80, I-90, and I-25 corridors with this issue, do we really believe that there are no cases out there? The problem is the ability to find these cases, and it really is incumbent upon the, many times, unless it's a sting, it's incumbent upon the victims to come forward. And unfortunately, these victims all too often feel guilty themselves. And if our statutes encourage that guilt by having an opportunity for prosecution, then we are creating a worse atmosphere to get these cases to come out. So this bill is an effort to make it easier for minor victims to come forward and just let their story be told, so that we can then go after and prosecute the perpetrators that are doing this to our minors. So with that, I'll go get started on the bill. Well, actually, I want to tell you about federal codes and 31 states having done similar legislation to this. And so we are really bringing our statutes in line with better statutes to deal with this particular problem based on studies that have happened in this particular area of concern. So the bill itself, going to page 2, we see in paragraph A that we add the definition of human trafficking, that a minor will be considered a victim in this situation. In paragraph B, we expand the scope of available assistance to children. So this bill is actually opening up opportunities to get more help to children that are caught up in this type of activity. And with that, Madam Chairman, at this time, I would like to bring committee of the whole amendment number 1 to House Bill 210. I move committee of the whole amendment 1 to House Bill number 210. Okay, so this amendment came up it's a result of a discussion that came up during the committee hearing on this particular bill. One concern is that we don't want to create unintended consequences. So one potential unintended consequence is if we make it so that a minor cannot be prosecuted for this crime, then is it possible that minors will feel free to be more engaged in this kind of activity? So in an effort to address that concern, what we've done is we've come up with a presumption, a rebuttable presumption, and we're inserting that into the statute. That requires a change in the definition of the act. It also includes inserting the rebuttable presumption into the language, and we remove the prostitution penalties section 6-4-101. Now, we're not removing that from statute, we're simply removing it from the bill, so we're making no changes to 6-4-101. And with that, I would ask that we go ahead and dispense with that. I call the question.
Chairman Zwanser.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just want to say how much I support this amendment. As you heard, it was a very close 5-4 vote in committee, and I did vote in favor of the bill, knowing that we were going to come and amend the overall issue with the bill is trying to get minors into counseling, therapy, the help they need. The bill originally contemplated, saying that they're all victims of human trafficking instead of exploitation, which didn't sit well with me. I think what the good bringer of this amendment and the bill has done is make it a much cleaner process of ensuring that minors who are engaged doing this type of activity aren't automatically assumed to be child sex trafficking victims, but this still provides the correct avenue to get them the correct treatment they need. So I'm strongly in favor of the committee, the whole amendment, would ask you to vote yes.
Chairman Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just real quick, in favor of the committee, the whole amendment, and just to clarify a few things, this was a very close vote in the Judiciary Committee. I voted to break the tie and let this bill come to the floor, knowing that we were going to have this amendment. So it is a very important amendment. I still think there's probably some work that we can do on some further readings on this bill. And I think the main issue, the chairman of corporations hit the nail on the head, is that, number one, we did not hear any testimony on the last time that a minor was prosecuted in the state of Wyoming as a prostitute. And so then what is the purpose of the bill? And so the purpose of the bill is still, it's important as we are honing in on what we define as human
Chairman
trafficking.
Olson, we're on the amendment.
I'm on the amendment. I'm explaining the amendment. Thank you. So so it is important because through the amendment, we provide you, because what the bill does without the amendment is simply define every victim of human trafficking as a victim when there is no trafficker. And that's very confusing. Could be addressed easily in another area of law, as was addressed by the chairman of corporations. But the way that we can get around the innocence being brought in under the statute is the rebuttable presumption. So very good amendment. Possibly might see some additional amendments on second reading, just trying to get this exactly where we want it to protect those that we're trying to protect. So good amendment, and for the bill, just to clarify. Thank you.
Sensing, okay, question being called. All those in favor of committee of the whole amendment, one, signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Committee of the whole amendment one has passed. Back on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Question being called. All those in favor of House Bill 210, all those in favor of Chairman Olson's motion, when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that bill number 210 do pass. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. House Bill 210 has passed the committee of the whole. I guess we're continuing. House Bill 247. Reading clerk, please read the bill.
House Bill 247, sponsored by Representative Provenza, Law Enforcement Hiring Practices, an act relating to peace officers. Mr. Speaker, your committee number one, Judiciary, to whom was referred House Bill 247, Law Enforcement Hiring Practices, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Crago, Oakley, Olson, Provenza, Washit, Yin. Noes, Representatives Larson, Dan, Zwanitzer. Excused, Representative Rodriguez Williams. Representative Olson, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Olson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that House Bill 247 do pass. And I further kind of move the standing committee amendment number one to this bill. And I'll first explain the standing committee amendment, and then I'll turn over the explanation of the bill to the sponsor of the bill. I know it's right before lunch and we're hungry, so I'm gonna make this one real easy. I'm gonna ask that you reject the standing committee amendment or the standing committee amendment. And after that, you will see a committee of the whole amendment, which after passing the standing committee of the amendment, we further work this with stakeholders. And I think the committee of the whole amendment gets us to where we want to be. So ask for a no vote on the standing committee amendment.
Having heard a question being called? Thank you. All those in favor of Standing Committee Amendment number 1, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. We are now, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 has failed. Back on the bill. Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just because of it, we are almost to lunch, so I'm getting ahead of myself. There is not a committee of the whole amendment. It's going to be a second reading amendment. So I apologize if I may have confused you, but that will clarify what we're trying to amend. And with that, I'll turn over the explanation of the bill to the good representative from over the hill in the city that is home to our university.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And just be clear, we will work on that second amendment because we don't want to take up too much of time from your committee of the whole bills. So this bill came in essence of myself and folks in my community working with the Peace Officer Standards and Training Office. This bill is supported by POST, that is that Peace Officer Standards and Training Office. It also is supported by WASCOP. So the purpose or the problem that this bill is trying to solve is that when you have officers who engage in serious misconduct, they often will resign without a completion of an investigation, and there's no record that is kept when that happens. So the investigation is over and they quit and they can move on to another job. And we've seen across the state officers who have engaged in serious misconduct be able to obtain employment elsewhere without that record kind of following them. So this bill is trying to ensure that we protect the sanctity of law enforcement by prohibiting officers with a demonstrated history of serious misconduct from obtaining employment within the state of Wyoming and from keeping their certification as peace officers. Additionally, what this bill does is it directs agencies to submit their serious misconduct complaints and investigations over to POST for record keeping. And that is specifically because we see that there are different record keeping or just how agencies might handle misconduct records across the state. So for example, in my home county, we have seen that on page 26 of their policy manual prior to our new sheriff, after 1 year, the employee may submit a written request to the sheriff for consideration of removal of disciplinary actions regarding the written reprimands. If that request is approved, the disciplinary record will be removed from the employee's file and destroyed by shredding. So what we're trying to do is ensure that our misconduct records and investigations thereof go under the state agency that I kept naming and I should stop doing. But this also provides uniformity in handling of serious misconduct cases. So which is someone who quite literally has developed a scientific scale and studied public perceptions of police legitimacy. I can tell you that this is critical and important for public's trust in law enforcement. And currently under our statutes of 16-4-203, Wyoming statutes deny the right of inspection of public employee personnel files except to officials who supervise the work of an individual in question. And it goes on to say, but essentially what this means is that this office that oversees the certification process does not have access to those records all the time. So even though they are maintaining the certification, they cannot access them. So what we're trying to do to support this office to ensure that we uphold good law enforcement in the state of Wyoming is provide them access to those records. So that's the importance of this. So this again is a bill that has come before the body today through work with that standards and training office. So now with all of that kind of background information, I will walk you through the bill. So on page 1, lines 13 through 16, this is just this 9-1-704 is a statute that dictates who qualifies for peace officer certification. And there's a list of things like being, I think, 18 years or older. You have to get all of your training and so forth. And then on page 2, lines 1 through 4, that continues that language. And this is important. So this notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary. So we're not changing anything to compete with records laws. And then on line 6, Romanet I, we're saying if this officer was dismissed for serious misconduct, or and this is where we'll see some of that second reading language put in later that protects officers who haven't done misconduct. But essentially, we're trying to close a loophole in 8 through 9. Current problem with officers leaving. So if an officer sees the writing on the wall, they've engaged in serious misconduct, oftentimes they'll just leave and they get to go have their other job. And additionally, this on line 16 through 18, you see that this is the employment due process clause. So we're not working against their right to work as law enforcement. And then we also have on page 3, lines 8 through 14, we define what serious misconduct is. This language was kind of looked at through other states, and knowing that we don't want to make it so strict that we harm post's ability to do anything about it. And then this allows for on or after July 1st. So that's the guts of the bill, and I will stand for any questions.
Question being called. All those in favor of Chairman Olson's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that bill number 247 do pass. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. House Bill 247 has passed committee of the whole. Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Chairman, I move that the House stand in recess until 2 p.m.
Any committee announcements? Chairman Zwaniter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, will meet in 5 minutes in EO 5 to hear the following 2 bills. Senate File 36, for-profit public benefit corporations, and Senate File 62, repealing the sunset date for the OCA.
Chairman Paxton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Your committee number 4, Education, will meet in room E3 5 minutes after recess, noon recess, to consider Senate File 79, Medicaid billing for school-based services, Senate File 108, Career and Technical Education Terminology, and Senate File 115, Education Pupil Teacher Contact Time.
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Your House Appropriations will meet in roughly 5 minutes to hear Senate File 2 and Senate File 6 in room 301.
Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Committee number 8 will meet tomorrow upon noon recess to consider Senate File 4, Airport Districts, Senate File 7, Autonomous Vehicles, and Senate File 107, Transportation Statutory Amendments 2.
Okay, we're